Hi, we're talking about screen printing. Screen printing is really easy. There's really only two things that you've got to look at. One of them is the design, how detailed it is. We'll talk about that in a sec. And the other thing is then working out what you're actually printing on, and that will dictate your mesh size and the sort of inks you're going to use. Firstly, we'll talk about the design. Now here we've just used some basic contact and stuck it onto the screen. There's a whole lot of different ways of getting your image onto a screen. You can use a liquid stencil like the Derivan liquid stencil and paint on your design. So the next thing you need to think about, what do you actually want to print on? Paper, wood, cardboard, metal, aluminium, all those sort of things. You'll need one type of ink and also one type mesh size. We'll talk about that in a sec. Or fabric. Now, I'll talk about the mesh size first because sometimes that can get a little bit complicated, but there's no need for it to be. Think of it this way. The fabric, if we're printing on fabric, will soak up much more ink. We'll want more ink to cover to get a nice opaque, bright colour versus the paper, wood, cardboard or anything else. Those surfaces can be porous as well, but they won't be nearly as porous as fabric. So the fabric or the mesh for the fabric needs to be much bigger. The holes in the mesh need to be bigger to let more ink through. Conversely, on paper, you don't need to lay as much ink down, so the holes can be a little bit thinner. So when we're printing over the top and dragging the squeegee across, we're not getting as much ink through. Now, there are a whole lot of different sizes that you can buy, mesh sizes. We talk about, I think I've got here 43T and 120 mesh, and a 77T and 200 mesh. What all those numbers mean is just how many threads in the weave there are per given measurement, be that a centimetre or an inch or that sort of thing. So basically the bigger the number, the finer the holes will be because there's more threads per inch or centimetre, and conversely, the smaller the number, the bigger the holes will be because there's less threads. That's the easiest way to remember it. So just to recap on that, you'll see with the printing on the fabric, it will tend to bleed a little bit, and so trying to get really fine lines will not be as successful on fabric as it will be printing on paper with a finer mesh screen. Now, the reason we have this sort of little jig set up here is when you're printing on dark fabrics, you'll nearly always have to do either a white base and then the colour over the top, or if you're trying to print white, you'll probably have to do two layers or two prints of white, and obviously you need them to be back in exactly the same place. So if you're doing a run of t-shirts, you want to get some cardboard that you can stretch the t-shirt out on. We lay it down. You need to have some registration marks to make sure that it always goes back in the same place. Now, quite often, you can just have a hairdryer on hand, print once, lift the screen up, hit it with the hairdryer, not facing the screen because you don't want to dry the ink in the screen, just to dry it enough so it's touch dry, and then put the screen back in exactly the same place and give it another pull, and that way you will get an even, solid, opaque coverage. So you can buy jigs to hold the screens, but it's easy enough just to get a standard hinge, knock the pin out, bend it over, and that way you can pull it in and out so you can take the screen off to wash it. But in the meantime, it'll hold it nice and firm. If you find that it moves around a little bit, just put a piece of wood just to bit of scrap up the side, and you've got something to lean your screen on as you come down, and then you're away, and you should be registering in the same place every time. Now, using the jig setup, in other words a regular hinge, is useful for paper as well. Generally, you'll want to do more than just one screen. You'll actually want to have a few different colours, a few different screens, and those screens or those designs will need to interlock. You don't want them, generally you wouldn't want them running over the top of each other, so you need to register them. And quite often this will be done with a little cross in the design, which will then not be printed onto the paper that you're working on or be printed further out. But really simple to do, once again, with a basic little hinge on a piece of wood. So that's the mesh size, pretty simple. What you're going to put through the mesh will be dictated, like the mesh, by what you're printing on, be that fabric or paper. So you can use a dedicated fabric ink like the Derivan Screen Ink, and that's what it's designed to do. You'll have to heat fix them afterwards. The instructions are on the website or on the side of the jar. They're all water-based, water wash up. Screens wash out in water. Just make sure you don't let the ink set in the screen or dry in the screen, because you'll find it really hard to get out. If you're printing on paper, wood, metal, pretty well anything else other than fabric that you're going to wash regularly, using something like the Derivan Acrylic or the Derivan Students is fine, just to use directly through the screen. To lubricate it a little bit, and you'll find these are very strong colours, you may want to use a medium called printing gel. Now this will help slow the drying time a little bit, and these will dry fairly quickly in the screen, so you don't want to muck around between prints. You want to print, get the paper out and do the next one. The printing gel will help to slow the drying time. It'll also extend the colour a little bit or reduce the colour. So if you want transparent colours, if you are going to lay different designs on top of each other and then in different colours, which can look fantastic, you'll want to use something like printing gel, generally about 10 or 20%, but it depends on just how transparent you want them, mixed in with the paint, and then use that to screen with. Now, a sneaky little hint: if you happen to have some students' acrylics or any sort of water-based acrylics really, and you're only doing a short run of t-shirts you want to print onto fabric, you can actually use the fabric fixative, about 1 part of the fabric fixative to 2 parts paint generally. You'll end up with something very similar to the dedicated silk screenings for fabric. It has to be heat fixed just like the fabric inks. But as I say, if you just want to experiment a little bit and you're not going out to print hundreds and hundreds of t-shirts, then maybe that could be an option. So screen printing really is that easy. So why not give it a go? And don't forget to subscribe.